Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here to speak with you today. Nothing's more important than privacy tech, because embedding privacy into technology is absolutely critical. So I'm going to talk to you about my privacy by design framework. But before I do that, I always like to start by dispelling the myths. In the next slide, you'll see that's where I always begin. I want to dispel the myths. In the next slide, the first big myth is that privacy is all about secrecy, and if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? The problem is that that's not what freedom is about. This could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich, because their view was, well, what's the problem? You're a law-abiding citizen. The state should be able to know everything about you. Nonsense. Get rid of that mindset. In the next slide, I talk about what privacy is really about. It's about control. In the next slide, I expand upon that it's about personal control. You see, the user has to be in control of the use and disclosure of their data. It's absolutely critical because only the user knows the context associated with the data. So only you know if certain data is sensitive or not, if you want to share it or not. That is what is critical. No one else knows the context associated with the data. And that's why you have to be in control, and you have to have the freedom to choose whether you wish to disclose that information or not. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination, that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And they nailed it. And it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and the total cessation of their freedom. And when that ended, they said, never again will we allow the state to strip us of our privacy, and they've stood by that. They continue to be the leading country globally in terms of privacy and data protection. But in the next slide, I also like to show that privacy is essential to freedom. It's a necessary condition for societal prosperity, for well-being, because you see, innovation, creativity, and all the prosperity that results from that requires freedom. And privacy forms the foundation of freedom. Without privacy, you can't have personal human rights, property rights, civil liberties. None of these conceptual engines for innovation and creativity can exist without privacy. I always like to give the example of Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. And he would take his old car in and buy another white Mercedes, same make model, and take it home. 6 months less a day, he would take that back to the dealership and get a new car. Why would he do that, you're saying? Because he didn't want a license plate on his car. And at that time, you had up to 6 months before you had to have a license plate number attached to your car when you bought a new car. So he didn't want a license. He didn't want to be tracked, surveilled. He didn't want anyone knowing his whereabouts. So he kept doing this. I love it. Unfortunately, after he died, California changed the law so you have to get a license plate almost right away. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. It's the exact opposite of privacy. It just shrinks your cognitive bandwidth. Sorry, I'm a psychologist. That's how I think and talk. Because when you're not being surveilled, you're not worried. You can have blue sky crazy thinking, and all kinds of innovation comes from that mindset. But if you think you're being surveilled or watched, then everything goes inward. You're looking over your shoulder. Awful. Cognitive bandwidth gets shrunk. Creativity goes out the door. So we have to ensure that we minimize surveillance as much as imaginable, as much as possible. It's absolutely critical. Let me talk in the next slide about privacy by design, which is something I created a long time ago during my first term as privacy commissioner. I was commissioner for 3 terms. And when I started, you see, as I mentioned, I'm a psychologist. So the view I brought to privacy and data protection was not simply the legal view, which was regulatory compliance after the fact. You bring in the law and apply it to a privacy infraction or data breach, and you get a wonderful resolution. And that has enormous value. But I wanted a different approach as well. I wanted to prevent the privacy harms from rising. And this is where privacy and tech can just go hand in hand. I wanted a model of prevention that would ensure that we could bake privacy into the code, into the design of technology. I wanted a model of prevention. And this was very different to my lawyers when I first started, but they came around and they saw the benefit of it. And I also said, it's not just privacy by design versus regulatory compliance. It's both. They complement each other. And so we had great success with this. In the next slide, privacy by design was unanimously passed as an international standard in 2010. Privacy commissioners have an international conference once a year, usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day session, we have a half day devoted to commissioners introducing resolutions that they want the entire assembly of privacy commissioners and data protection authorities to vote on. And in 2010, I introduced a resolution saying that privacy by design should complement regulatory compliance as an international standard. And to my amazement, it was unanimously passed. And I say that because, as I mentioned, most privacy commissioners are lawyers. They come brilliant lawyers who love drilling down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A, and applying that to the fact situation. Very valuable. But I didn't think they would embrace a proactive preventative model involved in privacy tech and embedding privacy into the code. Afterwards, I went around thanking all the commissioners for passing, voting in favor of this, and just querying them out. And I understood why they voted in favor of this. In the next slide, as I spoke to them, I realized that what they all knew was that we're only reaching the tip of the iceberg as privacy commissioners, that the majority of harms in this day and age of massive social media, online connectivity, that the majority of the harms, the base of the iceberg, were remaining largely unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. And that was completely unacceptable to the commissioners. So we all agreed that regulatory compliance, while very valuable, it is no longer sustainable as the sole model for ensuring the future of privacy. We have to turn to tech, and privacy tech is where it goes hand in hand. Now, let me tell you the two essentials to privacy by design in the next slide. I've also already talked about you have to be proactive to ensure, in the next slide, that the harms, oh yes, I forgot this one. Forgive me. Privacy by design, we have great success with this. It's been translated into 40 languages. And while I was commissioner, there wasn't a day that would go by when I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction and what they were doing. Very, very exciting. And this continues to this day. Now, in the next slide, I will tell you the two essentials to privacy by design, which you also know I've already talked about being proactive, prevent the harms from arising. Let me talk about banishing zero-sum models for a moment, because this is absolutely critical. In the next slide, I talk about the need to get rid of this win, lose, either or model of zero-sum. That's what zero-sum means. You can have a positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a sum of zero. Well, I don't mind gains in security, but I sure as heck wasn't going to have that come at the cost of privacy. So I spent the greater part of a year looking everywhere. I talked to data scientists, technologists all around the world to make sure that we could do this, that we could do what's called positive sum. All of this is part of game theory. Game theory was created by Professor Anatol Rappaport many years ago. And when I was doing my graduate work at University of Toronto, he was there. So I used to just fawn over him. And I say, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace zero-sum models, either or? Me, I'm the ultimate believer in multiple gains. And I'm the eternal optimist. And I said, why wouldn't they prefer positive sum, which means you can have two positive gains in two areas at the same time? And he said, Anne, it's simple. Zero sum is the lazy man's way out. It's much easier to do win-lose, zero sum, but the gains are far greater when you do positive sum, multiple positive gains. And that's what we have to embed in technology associated with privacy. In the next slide, I just make a summary of this, that we have to change to a positive sum model and create win-win scenarios. And I remember consulting with people like brilliant Bruce Schneier, brilliant data scientist, cryptographer. And he said, Anne, the zero-sum thing, it involves unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. We don't have to go there. And it's as simple and as difficult as replacing versus with and. Don't make it one interest versus another. Make it one interest and another, multiple positive gains. In the next slide, I'm going to show you the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design, which I literally created at my kitchen table over 3 nights at the beginning of my first term as privacy commissioner. And I've gone through a number of them, so I'll keep it short. You have to be proactive to prevent the harms from arising. Privacy is the default setting. Let me spend a moment on this. It's huge. It's a game changer. When privacy is the default setting, what it means is instead of expecting your customers to wade through all the legalese and the terms of service and the pages and pages in the privacy policy, searching for the opt-out box that says, do not use my personal information for anything other than the primary purpose of the data collection that I consented to. Nobody does that anymore. It takes hours. No one has the time. Life is short, but it doesn't mean people don't care deeply about privacy. In the last 2 years, people have, in all the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, they have 90 percentile concern for privacy. 90% of those surveyed have said they're very concerned about privacy. 92% have said that they're concerned about the loss of control over their personal information. And recall, privacy is all about control. Privacy is the default setting, flips that on its head. It says to people, you don't have to ask for privacy. We give it to you automatically. It's the default setting. We are only permitted to use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection that you consented to. If another use arises down the road that we'd like to use your information for, we'll have to come back to you and seek your positive consent again. Game changer. This builds trust like no other at a time where there's such a massive, massive trust deficit. So get smart. Embed privacy as the default setting in your tech, and you will make leaps and bounds in terms of building trusted business relationships. Embedded in design obviously speaks for itself, but it's essential in tech because you have to make it part of the code. It is part of the code. You can't forget about it. It's there. It's in the design. It is ongoing. We've talked a lot about full functionality. I won't bore you anymore with that, but just get rid of zero sum. So yesterday, do positive sum multiple gains. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily hacks and phishing, and if you don't have a solid foundation of security from end to end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So make sure you start with a base of very strong security. Visibility and transparency is so important. I always tell companies and governments, you may have custody and control over someone's personal information, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the data subject. So make sure they have a right of access to their information and keep it open. But the benefits to you as a company, for example, are huge because what companies have told me who do this, they love it. They say, look, we've got information on thousands and thousands of customers. We don't know what's accurate and what's not. But when you give access to individuals to their own data, they know immediately if something is no longer the case. Oh, that was 2 years ago. Here's the most accurate data. They update it. They alert you to faulty aspects of it. So it increases the quality of your data holdings by giving individuals the right of access to their information. Accuracy goes way up. And respect for user privacy, I could have started with this as the first. If you keep it user-centric, all of this falls into place. It becomes a win-win. So that's all there is, and as much as there is, to privacy by design. To me, it's like motherhood. Obviously, to many people, it's not. But honestly, companies that have gotten certified for privacy by design, which I offer with KPMG, they have come back to me and they say they love it. It's a game changer. It creates trusted business relationships and it gives them a competitive advantage over the other guys. Now, in the next slide, just in case you think maybe this is all motherhood and it doesn't really work in real life, au contraire. We did a paper, actually this is a compilation of 22 papers we wrote with all of the major tech companies while I was commissioner. Think of any big company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, IBM, Oracle, and I'm leaving out a number of them. We wrote a paper with each of those companies and others on all of these areas: biometrics, CCTV cameras, obviously, smart meters, NFCs, remote home healthcare. We did it because we wanted to show the world that these big companies can say they can do it in these areas, and here's how they're improving it. So it's really critical. Take a look at the paper. In the next slide, this was just my last days as commissioner. I love this letter I got from JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center. And they said, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. And I thought, gosh, if the Japanese can grasp the value of positive sum over zero sum, and English isn't their first language, then surely the rest of us should be able to embrace this. So it was very exciting to me. Now you may say, okay, well, what's it going to cost me? Sure, there's a cost involved in doing privacy by design, just like there is in any other privacy tech. But the cost is a fraction of what you will incur if you have a data breach or privacy infraction. In the next slide, I show how the proactive cost of privacy by design is a fraction of all of the lawsuits that are now being initiated when there are data breaches. And they're not just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits. Huge, costs millions and millions, and sometimes it just completely eradicates your business. The damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. And then loss of consumer confidence and trust. You may lose all your customers, and it goes out the door. In Canada, a number of years ago, Target, the store that's in the United States, opened up some shops in Canada. But then there was a major privacy breach about 3-4 years ago in Target. The CEO of Target in the United States resigned. The president of Target in Canada was fired. And within a few months, there were no more Target stores in Canada. It all shut down. People lost consumer confidence. They weren't going to Target anymore. This is real. You have to pay attention to all of this. Now, let me switch gears in the next slide to the EU. As you know, the European Union introduced a new law 2 years ago, came into effect, the General Data Protection Regulation. And it is an amazing law. It strengthens privacy and data protection, and it gives citizens greater control over their personal data. And I keep repeating, privacy is all about control. In the next slide, what excited me especially is that they added my privacy by design framework into the GDPR. I mean, amazing. And privacy is the default, the second foundational principle. And it's called data protection by design in Europe. It's amazing that they did this because it just strengthens privacy globally everywhere, because everyone wants to have essential equivalence with the EU GDPR so that they can engage in trade and business without any fear or repercussion. In the next slide, well, I would not go this far. Information Age wrote an article, and they said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I can assure you there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think the point she's trying to make was, if you do privacy by design, you raise the bar so dramatically on privacy and data protection that you will have fulfilled many of the other clauses in the GDPR. And for the first time ever in Canada, we no longer have essential equivalence with the European privacy laws, which we've always enjoyed thus far. So a few years ago, in the next slide, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada said, we need to upgrade our federal private sector legislation, and we need to add privacy by design to it, because after all, they've done that in the GDPR. It was created by a Canadian and Cavoukian, so we have to do it here. And the year following this, in response to this, in the next slide, we got a great result. The federal government put out a paper called Towards Privacy by Design, upgrading the federal private sector legislation, PIPEDA. And we were all very excited because we thought, oh, this is a great sign. I don't have time to go into it now, but the new law the new bill that they just introduced to do this, Bill C-11, there's no mention of privacy by design in it. They didn't want to strengthen it that much. Such a disappointment, but that's another topic. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We now offer privacy by design certification in partnership with KPMG because it's essential. You have to have some substantiation of the fact that you're doing this. And that's what businesses want. So when businesses come to be certified, I say to them, KPMG, I'm going to send them to you, and they're going to look under the hood. They're going to really make sure you're walking the talk on the 7 foundational principles that you've embedded them in. And they say, absolutely, for sure, do it. And they love it because once they do get certified, they put it on their webpage. They tell all their customers about it. It builds such trust. And they have all told me it gives them a competitive advantage over the other guys. So embedding privacy into your code by design, into your tech, huge, huge advantage that you get from it. Okay, in the next slide, I just talk very briefly about comments about how we are privacy by design and the EU GDPR are coming together. And in the next slide, I talk about this new global privacy and security experts, the global privacy and security by design. I've expanded it to ensure that people know that privacy and security go hand in hand. And we launched this new organization a few years ago, and I was delighted when I went to seek some founding members. Darren Entwistle, who's the CEO of TELUS, the major telco in Canada, immediately said, yes, Anne, of course. And TELUS has been certified for privacy by design on multiple occasions because we certify for various products and services. They have numerous certifications. They lead with privacy by design. Michael Chertoff, the second Secretary of Homeland Security in the United States, when I approached him to ask him if he'd be a member, he said, of course, Anne, of course I'd be a member. We have to do this. So it's very exciting. Jill de Kerkhoff in the EU Director of Counterterrorism, he said, of course we have to do this. Privacy and security go hand in hand. So I could go on, but it's very exciting. In the next slide, you'll see that we have had great success with this. And the next slide simply outlines some of the essentials about doing both, getting rid of zero sum, etc. In the next slide, I should tell you, I also offer a course on privacy by design through Ryerson University, an online course, because there's so much interest in this. People all around the world have been subscribing to this. So if you have any interest, take a look. We'd love to have you on board. It's a very exciting time. So in the next slide, I want to conclude, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, that's right. I have my COVID contact tracing. Let's go to the next slide very quickly, because I just want to show you in the next slide that we have to be extremely careful. The Guardian issued this about 8 months ago. 300 experts from all around the world, epidemiologists, scientists, wrote an open letter saying we have to ensure that governments build contact tracing technology in a privacy protective manner, or it will fail. In the next slide, we talk about another letter from experts, 177 cybersecurity experts from the UK, said basically the same thing, that if you use contact tracing apps to surveil people, it's going to end. Everything is going to end. It's going to be abysmal. So it's wonderful that they're focusing on this. In the next slide, I talk about the Apple-Google API that has formed the foundation of a number of contact tracing apps, or exposure notification apps, as they call it. In Ontario, I worked with the Ontario government because Apple briefed me. I would look under the hood. Apple briefed me, walked me through all the code. No personal information is collected whatsoever, none. It's amazing. Take a look at it. We developed the COVID alert in Ontario, and then that was taken over by Canada to make it available to all of Canada. The COVID alert is amazing, and it's totally privacy protective. No personal data collected whatsoever. The next slide. I do want to end now because I don't want to run out of time. But privacy and security both have to go hand in hand. They have to be embedded in the privacy tech. You can't just do one versus the other. Please make sure both are in the design and technology you're using. Focus on prevention. It is so much better. And if you get rid of the either or thinking of zero sum win lose, you will lead all the way. I'm delighted to have had the time to speak to you today. And in the next slide, my last slide, I just want to mention that if you have any interest in following me on Twitter, I tweet every morning between 5 and 6 a.m. the latest stories of the day, privacy stories. In the next slide, you'll see that my Twitter handle is is just Ann Cavoukian, my name. And if you want to follow me, that would be great. It's entirely up to you. I just like to keep people updated on privacy and security, both going hand in hand in privacy tech. You can't leave one out, and you have to embed it in technology directly. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.